All right, let's get into it. We're going to talk about a material that, well, it almost feels alive. It's hard like a stone, it's colorful like a jewel, and it catches the light in this way that's just mesmerizing. Today, glass is literally everywhere, but thousands of years ago, it was a completely breathtaking piece of technology. This is the story of how ancient innovators turned simple sand into pure treasure. I mean, this quote from our source really says it all, doesn't it? There's this sense of wonder to glass, a feeling that it shouldn't even exist. It's not something you just dig out of the ground. It has to be made. And that whole process of creation, to the ancient world, it felt like a kind of magic. So, how on earth did they do it? So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll dig into why glass was seen as so magical. Then, we'll look at how it was actually invented in the first place. We're going to explore the ancient hotspots of production, uncover the archaeological secrets that proved where it came from, and finally trace its incredible legacy all the way to today. Okay, first up, an ancient magic. The most important thing to get your head around is that early glass wasn't for making, windows or drinking cups. Not at all. This was a high-status, totally elite material. It was rare, it was incredibly difficult to make, and it was absolutely dazzling to look at. Just think about that for a minute. A tiny, man-made bottle could be worth as much as a gemstone that was mined and traded across thousands of miles. This wasn't just a craft. This was the creation of artificial luxury. This was artisans looking at nature and saying, we can do that too. So how did they pull it off? That brings us to the invention itself. See, making glass wasn't just about shaping something that already existed. It was about creating a totally new substance from scratch. This was a huge leap forward, a true mix of incredible artistry and what we would now call material science. It sounds like such a simple question, right? But the answer is the key to understanding why this was so revolutionary. Glass isn't carved like a statue or hammered into shape like a sword. It's something else entirely. And this definition really gets to the core of it. It is a product of pure transformation. Ancient people took these common ingredients, things like sand, and through skill, knowledge, and a whole lot of heat, they basically transmuted them into something brand new and extraordinary. This is the history of chemistry just as much as it's the history of art. So if you break it down, the process looks kind of like this. You start with something full of silica, like sand or crushed quartz. Then you mix in other stuff to help it melt and keep it stable, and you crank up the heat in a furnace. The whole mix turns to liquid, and as it cools down, it hardens into that unique, non-crystalline solid we call glass. Sounds simple, right? Well, it was incredibly difficult to get right. So where did all this magic happen? Well, people were probably experimenting in a few different places, but two great civilizations really emerged as the epicenters of this brand new technology: Egypt and Mesopotamia. And what's so cool is that we see these two different but sort of parallel paths to innovation. In Egypt, glassmaking was tied directly to the pharaoh's court. They wanted luxury goods, and they were already masters of colored glazes. Over in Mesopotamia, we find this deep, deep tradition of technical know-how, even written texts on how to work with minerals. It was just the perfect environment for this new craft to explode. And the real showstopper, it was the color. See, ancient artisans weren't always going for see-through glass. They wanted these vibrant, solid colors. By adding things like cobalt and copper compounds into the molten mix, they could create this stunning deep blue that looked exactly like expensive lapis lazuli or a beautiful turquoise. They were basically master chemists. Now remember, this was way before anyone invented glassblowing. So how did they make hollow things, like little jars for perfumes? Well, the main technique was called core forming. It's this really ingenious method where you'd make a core out of something like clay and animal dung. Then you dip it or trail molten grass all around it. After you decorated it and let it cool down really slowly, you'd have to painstakingly scrape out the core, leaving this perfect little vessel behind. For the longest time, all we could do was admire these beautiful finished objects in museums. But that only tells you part of the story. The real detective work, the part that helped us move from just looking at art to understanding an entire ancient industry, that came from archaeology. And this is the million-dollar question for any archaeologist, right? Finding a beautiful glass vase in an Egyptian tomb, that's one thing. But proving it was actually made nearby and not just traded from hundreds of miles away, that's the real challenge. How could we be so sure these were centers of production and not just rich customers? The big breakthrough came from a site in Egypt called Tel El Amarna. And the work of this pioneering archaeologist, Flinders Petrie, back in the 1890s, completely changed the game. Amarna gave us the smoking gun that proved Egypt wasn't just buying glass, it was a major manufacturer. And what they found there wasn't just a bunch of pretty artifacts. No, it was the messy industrial reality of making stuff. They found workshop debris, bits of the actual furnaces, pieces of the clay pots, the crucibles they used to melt the glass. They found chunks of raw colored glass just waiting to be worked, and even the mistakes, the cracked or messed up pieces. This was the undeniable proof of a real, thriving workshop.
And that's why Amarna is so important. It let historians piece together the entire process. It showed that glassmaking was a big deal, an industrial-scale operation with specialists who knew exactly what they were doing, with the materials, the temperatures, the whole shebang. It moved the story of glass from the king's palace to the craftsman's workshop.
So what does it all add up to? Well, the work that was being done in these ancient workshops in Egypt and Mesopotamia wasn't just some curious craft. It was the very beginning of one of the most important material traditions in all of human history. It's honestly incredible to think about just how advanced this was. These artisans were practical chemists. They were physicists. They had to know which sand to use, what to add to change its color and properties, and how to control the temperatures in their furnaces with incredible precision. They were, without a doubt, the scientists of their day. And you can see that legacy so clearly right here. You can draw a straight line from those first tiny core-formed vessels through the Roman invention of glassblowing that made glass way more common, all the way to the incredibly pure, high-tech glass that makes up the screen you might be watching this on right now. It all started here. So, we'll leave you with this thought. Those ancient glassmakers learned to create something in a workshop that could rival the most beautiful gemstones found in nature. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the modern equivalents? What new materials are today's innovators creating to compete with, or maybe even surpass, the world around us?